Laura Burns, Head of Terrorism Research at George Washington University's Program on Extremism. With me here today, again, is Senior Research Fellow Jennifer Baker, and we are continuing our documentary on the evolution of Hamas in the United States.
So, Laura, when we left off in the last episode, we spoke about the 2003 Hamas suicide bombing that happened at a popular Western pub outside of Tel Aviv. Is that right?
Yes, we did. And to be clear, we have not even begun to cover a majority of the Hamas attacks that took place during the Second Intifada, where civilians were routinely targeted and killed relentlessly. One such attack was at a university where students were simply having lunch in the cafeteria. On July 31st, 2002, Hamas conducted this massacre, which resulted in the death of 9 people, 5 of whom were U.S. citizens, and about 100 were injured. One of the bombers was an employee at the university. Hamas then proudly claimed responsibility for killing these students.
This was an attack on a university cafeteria.
Yes. And there were so many other attacks. Key attacks that happened during this time frame included one at the Erez crossing, which occurred on January 14th. 4 Israelis were killed. There was a Jerusalem bus bombing on January 29th, and on February 22nd, there was another Jerusalem bus bombing that killed 8. Port bombings, I mean, it seemed like they were just repeatedly killing people. During that time period in the Second Intifada, Hamas also increased its Qassam rocket attacks, which prompted Israeli military responses, right? Because they've got rockets coming over, and Hamas collaborated with other, terrorist groups, and Israel retaliated by killing Hamas leaders, and that's when that started. And ultimately, Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, who was their Hamas spiritual leader, was killed in March of 2004 by Israel.
So what was the reaction by Hamas leaders in the Politburo?
They used to justify more death, despite the fact that Hamas continued killing campaigns were what led to Yassin's death in the first place. Here is a BBC interview of Khalid Mashal in the wake of the killing of Ahmed Yassin, where he continues the narratives we saw echoed in the 1993 Philadelphia meeting.
The leader of the Palestinian group Hamas, labeled by Europe and America as one of the most dangerous terrorist organizations in the world. Its leader had come here especially from Syria amid meticulous security. We had to change cars and locations. We ended up traveling in a van that had sealed windows to an undisclosed location. So when we finally caught up with the man, in the wake of the assassination of his spiritual leader, Sheikh Yassin, which way is the movement Hamas now heading? In the wake of the Israeli assassination of Sheikh Yassin, is Hamas planning yet another cycle of pointless revenge violence?
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. شلال الدم في فلسطين هو مستمرا بفعل الجرائم الإسرائيلية من قبل ولن يبدأ بعد الفعل شيخ حمد ياسين. الجريمة الصهيونية تستدعي ردا فلسطينيا، هذا شيء طبيعي. هذه المعاملة بالنسبة في كل القوانين والشرائع السماوية الإنسانية.
Where does it get you? Where does it get you, though, this retaliation? Doesn't change anything. More people die, more of your people die, more Israelis die. No progress is made. Haven't you got anything else to offer to the process? And when you take this revenge, and you see the bodies of Israeli women or children on the streets, does that make you feel better? But Sheikh Yassin was a man who ordered killings of civilians, Israeli civilians. You can hardly complain when in a war he himself is killed, can you?
الشيخ أحمد ياسين لم يأمر أحد. المقاومة لها جناح عسكري مختص والذي يقاتل على الأرض. هذا حق طبيعي.
He sanctioned the killings, didn't he? He sanctioned them.
العمليات المقاومة ليست بحاجة من أحد إلى قرار كل فلسطيني يعرف واجبه.
You target women and children. That is terrorism of the most brutal kind.
نحن لا نستهدف المدنيين ولا نستهدف الأطفال. نحن منذ البداية كانت المقاومة الفلسطينية تركز على الأهداف العسكرية وعلى المستوطنين، ولكن
So the suicide bombs on buses aren't meant for civilians? The children and women who die on buses? I don't notice the suicide bombers letting the civilians off the bus before they blow it up.
أنا لم أكن
Mr. Mashal, the record is different. The record's different. You fought every attempt at peace. You fought Oslo, you were against Madrid, you even condemned the Geneva Accord, you were against the Mitchell document, the Tenet document. Your organization is going against every attempt at peace.
When confronted about Hamas's opposition to peace, instead of responding to that, he claims that Oslo failed, without acknowledging that when the Oslo Peace Accords were signed, Hamas vowed to derail the peace accords and, in fact, instituted its suicide bombing campaign that ultimately led to the collapse of Oslo. Interestingly, raids on some of the Zakat committees that the HLF funded before it was shut down produced congratulatory messages to Sheikh Ahmed Yassin on his martyrdom, like this one from the Jenin Zakat Committee, where he was on a poster as a hero, and the poster was hung on the wall. And this is, kind of an example of Hamas's radicalization efforts at their best, honoring people who ordered suicide bombings against civilians. As you recall, Hamas's motto is to win it all, which is to eradicate Israel, or die trying. And those are really the only two options. In April, the man who replaced Yassin, Abdelaziz Rantisi, he had taken the lead for Hamas in Gaza. Well, he was also killed.
He was one of the 1992 Hamas deportees that we talked about a while back, and one that the HLF provided support to. Is that right?
Yes, we've seen him in several episodes. A great point. He was a very important Hamas leader. Like Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, Abdelaziz Rantisi was held out as a hero at Zakat committees that were once supported by the HLF, Zakat committees that were part of the Hamas social infrastructure and used to radicalize people, like the Jenin Zakat, where a poster from the wall was obtained of Rantisi, again lauding him as a hero who died for the sake of the cause.
So I believe there were a number of events that occurred in 2004 that were of significance.
Yes, that 2003, 2004 timeframe, a number of key events. Let's talk first about an event that occurred in August of 2004 that involved Ismail Elbarasse.
He was the number 3 on the list of the original U.S.-based Hamas leaders, is that right?
Yes, and he shared a bank account with Moussa Abu Marzouk, and he attended the 1993 Philadelphia meeting where they planned how they were going to continue to support Hamas. We are honored here, though, to host a retired FBI senior executive who will talk to us a little bit about Ismail Elbarasse and what he was doing with Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood during 2004.
Obviously, this was in the right after 9/11. It was very early on in the war against terror. And obviously, I was excited to be assigned to one of the larger field offices in the middle of that CT hunt. I was assigned to an Al-Qaeda squad, again in Washington field offices, with a focus on, obviously, the Middle East and the Gulf states. And in particular, what I was looking for in those early days was looking at the kind of grassroots movements that were enabling Al-Qaeda at the time. And that was pushing me towards, obviously, Muslim Brotherhood or the Ikhwan, and how it was essentially the foundation of Islamist ideology that ultimately would graduate into those particular individuals splitting into more violent organizations. We're specifically looking at, obviously, Hamas, but for me, it was looking at the Palestinian branch of the Muslim Brotherhood as I was looking at the overall Muslim Brotherhood structure in the United States, again, with a focus on attacking the grassroots movements before they became more radicalized. So that caused me to focus in on particular players that were in the Washington field office's jurisdiction. And one of those was an individual by the name of Ismail Elbarasse. And I knew Elbarasse at the time to be running closed USRA meetings for the Muslim Brotherhood in his house. I also knew that Elbarasse was an assistant for Abu Marzouk. He was essentially acting as a treasurer for the Muslim Brotherhood, and then ultimately the Palestinian Muslim Brotherhood in the United States, and ultimately the Palestine Committee and the like, which I'm sure we'll get into. So I had a particular focus on Elbarasse, very secretive. And we would, as well, I'm sure we'll talk about, the Elbarasse documents revealed just how secretive their agenda was in the United States. Not that we didn't already know that the Muslim Brotherhood, by its very infancy, and its, it derived in nations where it was seen as, like, a radical opposition. So the whole basis of the Muslim Brotherhood in any country that it's in is to be secretive, not to be detected, and create a grassroots movement, right, to then achieve the agenda, which is having an Islamic state in whatever region they are in. So Elbarasse obviously was one of my key targets at the time. There were other folks that were in my jurisdiction that were on my radar as well. Guys by the name of like Yasser Bushnak, who will, maybe we'll talk about later, who was on the Palestine Committee, a number of others. And then a little bit later, it would be Nihad Awad as the executive director of CARE. And obviously that's not just for the sake of looking at somebody championing civil rights, but that was looking at somebody and an organization that was sponsored by an organization whose agenda was to assist materially a terrorist organization, i.e. Hamas. Hamas is a terrorist organization just like Al-Qaeda is, but ironically, with a grassroots organization behind both of them, of which where they started, this thing called the Muslim Brotherhood.
Well, that is very interesting. So the Muslim Brotherhood is not just the parent organization for Hamas, but has also born individuals who have gone on to join Al-Qaeda and other terror organizations.
Yes, they have, and that overlap or potential overlap was quite concerning during the early 2000s, especially after 2001 in the September 11th attacks.
So on August 20th, 2004, I get a call from the Bridge Authority, from the Chesapeake Bay Bridge, also from the Baltimore Field Office, which has the jurisdiction over that bridge, also the Maryland State Police, all calling me saying, hey, we pulled over this particular vehicle that we saw folks in the vehicle videotaping what we thought was the support structure of the bridge, and not just normal tourist type videotaping. And we pulled him over, and it turns out this particular individual who's driving the car is Ismail Elbarasse. As they were going on the bridge, it's not just footage of the water and boats and sunsets, right? They're looking at the support beams, the expansion part of the bridge, etc. The Al-Qaeda had used several different other terrorist organizations and cells to do things for them, like recon, surveillance, and other things that we had seen throughout the world, particularly in the Middle East. So, and including a couple terrorist acts in which that Al-Qaeda had committed, but that members of Hamas had actually been a part of doing some of the recon for those ops. Our alarm bells are very high, especially for something that's going to target, infrastructure like that, mass casualties. So between all the reasonable articulable suspicion and probable cause that I had already on Elbarasse as a case, and his background and his direct connections to Hamas, most notably Abu Marzouk and the Palestine Committee, coupled with that other probable cause of, Hamas was known to do recon for Al-Qaeda, there was a particular focus for me on that's the risk. And then we executed a search warrant, not only for the video camera, car contents, but obviously for his house. There was a number of reasons in that search warrant to search his house, not just because of the video camera, but the video on top of the fact that we knew that he was running USRAs. We knew that he was obviously an assistant for Abu Marzouk, who was already a designated terrorist at the time, and that there was close associations with Hamas. And that resulted in the residential search warrant of Ismail Elbarasse, essentially that evening into the next morning. Now, I think we all were surprised his entire basement was nothing but an archive for the Muslim Brotherhood in the United States, obviously the Palestinian Muslim Brotherhood in the United States, and some historical, even Hamas documents that were in his house. They had an agenda, and he understood it was probably in his mind, it was more of a 30-year, long-term project, that he was going to be the custodian behind making sure that guy is guided in the right way. We really need to understand how much the Muslim Brotherhood has permeated the United States, right? I mean, over the thousands of documents that we took from Elbarasse's basement, all of which were important and extremely illuminating on a number of things. But I would say particularly with a Hamas focus, I would say there was probably 5 really super important documents that we pulled from that basement. The first would be, there was a document that was from 1988 that documented the US Muslim Brotherhood Shura Council. The next document would be the actual 1991 document that was the Palestinian committee leaders, right? So what we understood was, just to go back in time, 1987, the Intifada breaks out in Gaza. 1987, late 1987, 1988, Hamas is founded by Sheikh Yassin. Then the International Brotherhood then sends a mandate that Palestinian committees must be created in each one of the chapters of the Muslim Brotherhood worldwide, right, to support Hamas with, media, money, and men. And obviously the US Muslim Brotherhood followed suit. They created a Palestinian committee. And then we have a capture of where that committee was in 1991 from that document in Elbarasse's basement. The next document, which is related, is the 1991 organizational chart for the Palestine Committee that we captured, right? And there, what's so important about that particular document is it illustrates, it's not only that committee existed and we know what that committee was for, but what organizations did they create to support Hamas with money, media, and men? And it was clear in this document, right? They created IAP, and the IAP, or the Islamic Association of Palestine, was created as the propaganda machine. The next organization that was created was the UASR, right? And that was their attempt to combat, it was a think tank for lack of a better term. And then money, right? The most important thing that they need, and that's where they created the HLF. The fourth document that I say was the most important was a memo that we had received, or that we had recovered, that was by an individual by the name of Akram Al-Luni, which essentially mapped out the Muslim Brotherhood's subversive role in the United States. And that was important, not because we didn't already know that, but we're capturing by their own writings what their intent was. Their intent was to hide. Their intent was to undermine American process of democracy. The intent was to bring Islam as the ultimate religion in the United States. So it was more than just a Hamas thing. This is more than just a grassroots civil libertarian thing, right? This is a subversive movement that's meant to do us harm. And then I would say the fifth document, Laura, would be the security concepts paper that we recovered from Elbarasse's basement.
So, Laura, some of those documents we've seen and talked about, and some of those we haven't.
Yes, there were so many documents seized from Elbarasse's archives.
And they really painted a picture about not just what Hamas wanted to do here in the U.S., but the Muslim Brotherhood.
Yes, that's a very important point. You're correct. And these were their own documents. These weren't documents created by the government. These were their own archives.
Was CARE mentioned in any of these documents?
Yes. one of the documents that we've already spoken about was located in these archives.
Another document that was incredibly illustrative for us is that there was another spinoff that we saw that I spoke of the original Central Committee and the Palestine Committee and the organizations that were created. There was another document that had obviously the UASR, HLF, and IAP, right, and their particular, but now all of a sudden we had CARE listed, right? We had CARE listed under the UASR. And what we understood about that document at the time and the later evolution of CARE was that they saw that UASR was relatively ineffective and they needed something else that was more powerful and would resonate in the United States. And that's getting an organization that can wrap up in some of the U.S.'s protection. So CARE being created to essentially champion civil liberties, right? And particularly champion two particular causes, playing the victimization card, right? And playing the Islamophobia card. And I know some pundits have looked at that and said, look, it's a civil libertarian organization, right? That's hands off, right? And that was not what was important to the FBI, because sure, and we're not touching the fact that anybody would want to champion civil liberties, but the fact that the two leaders of the organization at the time, Omar Ahmed, Niyad Awad, are listed on the Palestine Committee, right? Omar Ahmed was a leader of the Palestine Committee. So we have two leaders of the organization that are associated with the Palestine Committee, which is incontrovertible, designed to create or to support Hamas with media, money, and men, leading the organization. And our point, as long as those individuals, and there were obviously some other individuals at the time that were a part of CARE's infrastructure, as long as those particular individuals are in that organization, it is a proxy of the Palestine Committee and therefore a proxy of Hamas, and they are a threat.
Just like we've spoken about.
Yes, and consistent with CARE's defense of all the Hamas-related entities that were under scrutiny during this time, CARE also reacted to the execution of this lawful search warrant at Ismail Elbarasse's house.
When we were executing the search warrant at Elbarasse's residence, obviously CARE had shown up at Elbarasse's residence. That was not surprising to us. We expected them to come. They had done similar things when other FBI search warrants and arrest warrants and the like. So they had shown up. They were one member of CARE was in the house, but the Elbarasse house, obviously by invitation of Ismail Elbarasse. There was some other CARE members that were out in the street. This is a private neighborhood in the cul-de-sac. And they were there, and they were making sure that their presence was felt. It wasn't a sense of cooperation. It was a sense of, hey, can we get in the way any way that we can, right? We want to make sure that you can't take all the documents, right? Obviously, there was nothing they could do. We had a search warrant, as long as the things that we were taking were inside the scope of the search warrant. But there was an attempt. It was quickly quashed, and it didn't linger, but it was of note that they were at the scene of the search warrant.
Well, given how they were created and by whom, I am not surprised.
Yes, very expected. But of course, they were operating under the cloak of civil rights, humanitarian rights, camouflaging their actual agenda.
So speaking of camouflaging their agenda, Sean referenced several documents that were seized from Elbarasse's archives. And I think we should look at those again, because even though it's dated, it clearly defines the anti-West, anti-democracy agenda of the U.S.-based Islamists.
Yes, this was the Muslim Brotherhood's document. It was their own document. We have said this before, but in the context of the U.S.-based individuals, when they refer to the group in their documents, they're referring to the Muslim Brotherhood. And this is an explanatory memorandum for the U.S. Muslim Brotherhood from May 1991.
And it was drafted by Mohammed Akram, and he was number 2 on the 1991 list of U.S.-based Hamas leaders. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. He's number 2. And he is abroad now, but still working in the Hamas charity fundraising arena abroad.
Interesting. Okay, so this document says it's a project for an explanatory memorandum for the general strategic goal for the group in North America, mentioned in the long-term plan.
Yes, and it says the strategic goal of the group, that's the Muslim Brotherhood in America, was approved by the Muslim Brotherhood's Shura Council and ultimately supports the global Islamic State wherever it is.
And the Shura Council is like a board of directors, is that right? Sort of like group of individuals who constitute the decision-making body for the U.S. Muslim Brotherhood.
Exactly. So moving forward in this document, it said that the priority that was approved by the Shura Council, their board of directors, for the group, the Muslim Brotherhood in America, is a term they call settlement. They go on to say that it must be stressed that it has become clear and emphatically known that all is in the agreement that we must settle or enable Islam and its movement in this part of the world.
And by Islam, this group means Islamism.
Yes, and we talked about how that's different. It's not just a religion, it's a political ideology. And they go on to explain what the role of the Muslim Brotherhood and each of its members is in North America. It's a process called settlement. The process of settlement is a civilization jihadist process, quote, with all the word means. The Ikhwan, and that's the Arabic term to refer to the Brotherhood, must understand that their work in America is a kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying the Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house by their hands and the hands of the believers so that it is eliminated and God's religion is made victorious over all other religions. It is a Muslim's destiny to perform jihad and work wherever he is and wherever he lands until the final hour comes.
And attached to that 1991 Muslim Brotherhood document, the one that you just read, was a list of U.S.-based organizations in English, including the IAP, the UASR, and the HLF.
Yes, and various other Muslim Brotherhood-related organizations, some of which we've talked about, that were in the United States at the time.
And their intent was to sabotage our democracy from within. It's quite an agenda.
Yes, one that is done through sowing discord in our country and spreading false narratives and frankly spreading hate.
It's a bit scary.
Yes, but that is what Islamists seek to do here and everywhere.
So Sean mentioned another document that had the leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood listed.
Yes, you can see this one is from 1988, the year Marzouk constructed the U.S.-based Hamas infrastructure. And this is the U.S. Muslim Brotherhood's Shura Council, the board of directors at the time. We see Musa Abu Marzouk listed, and there were other men on the Shura Council, including Mohammed Akram. Remember, we talked, he's the number 2 on the U.S.-based Hamas list. And he's authored several other documents that we've talked about that were found in these Elbarasse archives. But I want you to look at number 4, Tariq. That is a man named Tariq Suwaidan. He was and is today a senior Muslim Brotherhood leader globally. He is Kuwaiti and recently made a speech in the media to Al Jazeera in March of this year, 2025. So jumping ahead of the time frame we're talking about. But his speech demonstrates the long-term planning and goals of the Muslim Brotherhood. In the speech, he said that it is prohibited to, quote, make permanent peace with the enemies of Allah and that jihad must continue until Judgment Day. He called peace and normalization agreements treacherous. And then he went on to say, we see that all the demonstrations in Europe, Australia, and America, and that movement is exceptional. We expect them to continue to exert pressure on their regimes and then he requested listeners to provide support to the organizations that are driving the demonstrations. That's a powerful message, and one that we will dissect when we actually get into current time frame.
And I think that message is what we would expect from a senior Muslim Brotherhood leader. An Islamist, as the Muslim Brotherhood is anti-democratic and actually founded the Hamas terror organization.
Yes, and this guy helped run the U.S.-based Muslim Brotherhood during a very important time frame. And we see him here, in archived documents where he holds that position.
And that message about rejecting any form of peace is consistent with the Hamas charter, and also the message conveyed by these U.S.-based Hamas leaders in their conspiratorial meeting that we talked about at length.
Yes, the Philadelphia meeting, exactly. No peace, no compromise, right? And we're going to talk about some of the groups that are leading the pro-Hamas support on campuses and streets in the United States in later episodes when we get to the current time frame, and how they are directly connected to this group of Hamas and Muslim Brotherhood leaders we have been talking about, and how those people and organizations like Tariq Swadan are not calling for peace, but quite the opposite.
I'm really looking forward to those later episodes. So let's go back to the time frame that we're discussing today. What also happened in 2004? 2004.
Well, let's take a look at the Department of Justice press conference from July of 2004.
Today, a U.S.-based charity that claims to do good works is charged with funding the works of evil. About 2.5 years ago, President Bush announced the terrorist designation of the Texas-based Holy Land Foundation for Relief and Development. This designation was based on the foundation's long-standing association with Hamas, a notorious terrorist organization that engages in violent attacks to intimidate and coerce the government of Israel and its civilian population. To those who exploit good hearts to fund secretly violence and murder, this prosecution sends a clear message. There is no distinction between those who carry out terrorist attacks and those who knowingly finance terrorist attacks. The United States will ensure that both terrorists and their financiers meet the same certain justice.
So the HLF was indicted for supporting Hamas.
Yes, and 7 of its officers, Shukri Abu Bakr, Ghassan Alashi, Mohammed El Mazain, Mufid Abdul Qadir, Haitham Maghwari, Abdul Rahman Odeh, and Akram Mashal.
Were all of them arrested?
No, Haitham Maghwari and Akram Mashal. Akram is Mufid Abdul Qadir's cousin. Mufid is one of the other people that was indicted that we see doing the skits where he kills Jews. He's his cousin, but Haitham and Akram were already out of the country at the time. They had already fled the United States, so they were not apprehended, and they're currently fugitives.
Okay. Several years had passed since the designation. Why did they wait to bring the charges?
Well, the Attorney General explains it here.
Now, this prosecution would have been more difficult, if not impossible, were it not for the tools provided by the USA Patriot Act. After that law's passage, much of the information that had been gathered together, garnered by intelligence agents related to this investigation, became available for use by prosecutors. Indeed, significant compelling evidence that will be used at the trial in this case was derived through court-authorized surveillance under the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. Prosecutors also used the Patriot Act authority, which allowed the court in Dallas, which was most familiar with the case, to issue search warrants for locations outside the Dallas district.
Did CARE respond to these indictments?
They issued a press release saying they would monitor the indictments and quoted a statement by the HLF to the New York Times that HLF officials claimed the FBI falsified evidence against it and based its indictment on distorted translations of Israeli intelligence materials. In that New York Times article, Shukri Abu Bakr claimed, quote, we're 1,000% confident of our innocence, and we're going to fight as long as we can to get the truth out. Shukri Abu Bakr, the foundation's former chief executive, said in an interview on Monday, it's open season on American Muslims in this country, and that's what really scares me in all this.
Laura, that is pretty consistent messaging, it seems. It appears every time that one of these individuals or groups affiliated with the U.S.-based Hamas infrastructure are charged or outed, that this group tries to make it about all Muslims. And we know that that's not it.
You're right. They began seeding that narrative long ago, right? When one or two or three individuals or organizations that are directly tied to a Hamas terrorist organization are attacked, they try to paint themselves or paint the issue as anti-Muslim as opposed to what it really was. And what it really was were actions taken against individuals that were supporting terrorism. But, beginning that seeding of that false narrative is consistent with what they planned in the 1993 Philadelphia meeting, where they said, that they are going to lie, deceive, and camouflage in attempts to basically convince the American population that they are something that they are not, and that all of this is something, frankly, that it is not. When in reality, this had nothing to do with them being Muslims. It had everything to do with their support for a designated terrorist organization.
Right, and when you analyze the evolution of this group, it becomes very clear.
Yes, let's remember that 5 of the 7 people indicted in July of 2004 were involved in planning and or attending that original conspiratorial meeting, where the attendees plotted to support Hamas. They plotted to support jihad. They planned to lie to the American public. They planned to operate under a cloak of charity. They planned to derail any attempts at peace, to undermine the Palestinian Authority, to defeat the Palestinian self-rule. And that the 2 original co-founders of CARE were not only there at that conspiratorial meeting where all of this was planned, but they spoke at length about their agenda.
So the leaders of CARE knew at that time exactly what this was about, and that it was not about government action against all Muslims. That is their camouflage, and also their way of instilling fear in the Muslim population by telling them the government is after all Muslims.
Yes, exactly.
And you would know because this was your investigation. Is that right, Laura?
Yes, because we can hear the words of these men and see their writings and understand the actual truth. Thank you for listening and watching our documentary, and please join us next time.
Thank you. See you next time.
See you next time.
Hey, 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 hey,